Okay, so Prop 19, no, obviously. This should have been broken up into multiple propositions so we could vote yes on the ones that would work and no on the rest. What they try to do is they try to make this proposition sound as if it's going to be helpful to the citizens, but then they add other things that should be their own separate propositions into this single proposition. Even lawyers are like, I don't even know how to read this. So let's go ahead and get into the proposition itself. So Prop 19, the title is Changes Certain Property Tax Rules. And then the summary, which is where they try to convince you to vote for this, is that it allows homeowners who are over 55, disabled, or wildfire and disaster victims to transfer primary residence tax base to replacement residents. Changes taxation of family property transfers, establishes fire protection services fund, fiscal impact. Local governments could gain tens of millions of dollars of property tax revenue every year, probably growing over time to a few $100 million per year. Schools could receive similar property tax gains. Okay, so now we're going to go through these propositions of people who promote it and who are against it. So pros and cons. Not even pros and cons, just people who are for and against. Against people who are against it, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association writes, Proposition 19 takes away important taxpayer protections that have been enshrined in the state constitution since 1986. That's when 76% of voters approved Proposition 58 to allow parents to transfer home and limit it to other property to their children without an increase in property taxes. Proposition 19 eliminates Proposition 58. A similar measure, Proposition 193, which gives the same protection to transfers between grandparents and grandchildren if the children's parents were deceased. Proposition 19 would require property transferred within families to be reassessed to market value of the date of transfer, resulting in a huge property tax for long-held family homes. The only exception is if children move into the home within a certain year and make it to their principal residence. This is a $1 billion tax increase on California families. Proposition 19 contains other provisions which HGTA has supported in the past to expand the opportunities for homeowners to transfer the base year value of their home under Prop 13 to a replacement home. This was on the ballot in November 2018 as Proposition 5, but voters rejected it by a vote of 60 to 40%. Now, with a massive tax increase added, HGTA opposes this measure. Takes away the rights you have now. Under Proposition 13, passed in 1978, property is reassessed to market value upon change of ownership. However, in 1986, the legislature voted unanimously to put a measure on the ballot, which was Proposition 58, to change the state constitution and exempt parent-to-child transfer properties from reassessment. Prop 58 says parent and children may transfer a home of any value up to $1 million of assessed value of their property, such as small businesses, without reassessment, so the tax bill stays the same. So there was no loophole in Prop 58, which was approved by 75% of California voters. In 1996, Prop 193 extended the same rules to transfers between grandparents and grandchildren if the children's parents are deceased. It passed with a 67% approval, but Proposition 19 repeals Prop 58, and Prop 193 it requires that properties transferred between parents and children must be reassessed to current market value. The only exception is if the new homeowner moves into the home as principal residence within the year. Okay, that was arguments against Proposition 19. The arguments for Prop 19 are Proposition 19 limits property tax increases on primary residence for seniors, people with severe disabilities, families, and wildfire and natural disaster victims. It also says Proposition 19 generates hundreds of millions of annual funding for fire protection, local government, and school districts, which is a little weird because how are you going to increase the funding if you're promising people that they're not going to have to pay more in taxes when they transfer to a new home? It also says it supports life-saving fire emergency response. And again, if I own a home and I need to transfer to a new home and I don't want to increase my tax value, my property tax, and you're promising that I won't have to increase my property tax, how are you going to fund the schools? How do you fund local governments? How do you fund fire protection services? How do you increase by hundreds of millions of dollars if you're promising the homeowners that, but you're not going to have to pay for that? We're promising that we won't increase your taxes. So how do you promise that you're going to increase funding for them and also not increase taxing for us? It doesn't make sense. So basically, those are the promise. It's promising that it's going to protect these programs and increase their funding, but also not increase our taxes. So it's like, where are you going to get the money from? I don't understand. Where does that money come from? Now, in the actual amendment itself, there are some things here written, and it says, the measure beginning on and after February 16th, 2021 would exclude from the terms purchase and change in ownership for purposes of determining the full cash value of property, the purchase or transfer of a family or a family home or family farm, as those terms are defined, or the transfer in the case of a transfer between parents and their children, or between grandparents and their grandchildren, if all the parents of those children are deceased. In the case of a transfer of a family home, the measure would require that property continue as the family home of the transferee. The measure would require that the taxable value of the property be determined as provided. In the case of property tax benefits provided to a family home under these provisions, the bill will require the transferee to claim the homeowners or disabled veterans exemption within 1 year of the transfer. The measure would specify the above described provisions relating to transfers between parents or grandparents and children or grandchildren would apply to transferees occurring on or before February 15th, 2021. It's only a few months away. Like, you have a few months to fucking transfer your shit. The measure would establish the California Fire Response Fund in the state treasury. The measure would require the controller to annually transfer a specified amount based on calculations by the Director of Finance of the additional revenues and savings that accrued to the state from implementation of this measure's provisions from the general fund to that fund. However, the measure would provide that if the amount required to transfer to the California Fire Response exceeds the amount transferred from previous fiscal year by more than 10%, that excess amount would not be transferred to the California Fire Response Fund. The measure would require the legislature to appropriate monies in the fund solely in the purpose of funding fire suppression by staffing the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection and underfunded special districts that provide fire protection services as provided. And that's a pretty big problem because those departments are already underfunded. And that's why we have such uncontrollable wildfires, is because these forest management programs are so underfunded. It's like it's almost non-existent. And every year people are, it's like climate change. It's like, yes, the climate is changing, but also we should be funding land management programs so that they can help prevent the forest fires by managing these lands that have a lot of dead wood and stuff, which would reduce the amount of fire spreading throughout the state. So here, which should be its own separate proposition, which is, this is what I'm saying, like, they add these things in to make it sound like, hey, I should vote for this, which, like, yes, you should vote for this if it was a separate proposition. Anyways, it reads as, limit property tax increases on family homes used as primary residence by protecting the right of parents and grandparents to pass on their family home to their children and grandchildren for continued use as primary residence, while eliminating unfair tax loopholes used by East Coast investors, celebrities, wealthy non-California residents, and trust funds heirs to avoid paying their share of property taxes on vacation homes, income properties, and beachfront rentals they own in California. Which is like, yeah, you should definitely tax people who are non-California residents, other investors, especially if it's investors from other countries, because Californians should be owning property in California, and Californians should be running businesses in California. We shouldn't be allowing people like, other countries from, especially countries, communist countries like China, to be investing in property in California, because they're benefiting more than the Californians. So it's like, yeah, something that you would vote yes on. But why is it in this proposition? This is separate from this proposition. In conclusion, vote no on Prop 19. And I'll see you in the next video.